On a cold morning in May 1838, as soldiers tightened their lines and the sound of boots pressed into Georgia mud, thousands of native families were forced to leave everything they had ever known. Homes, graves, sacred land. But hidden within that long, sorrowful march was a story few were ever told. Because walking beside the Cherokee were people whose history would almost vanish from memory. People of African descent who were not just witnesses to native history. They were part of it. Have you ever wondered how an entire people could exist and still be erased? Not by time alone, but by documents, by politics, by silence. Long before America became the nation we recognize today, relationships were forming between Africans and native tribes. Travel back to the humid woodlands of Spanish Florida in the late 1600s. By September 1693, something extraordinary happened. The Spanish crown issued a royal decree promising freedom to enslaved Africans who escaped English colonies and converted to Catholicism. Word spread like wildfire through the plantations. Freedom was no longer just a dream whispered in the dark. It had an address. And many who fled north didn't survive the journey. But those who fled south often encountered something unexpected. The Seminole people. By the early 1700s, bonds began forming between escaped Africans and Seminole communities. These were not always relationships of charity. They were alliances built on mutual survival in a dangerous world. The forests became places of rebirth. Africans established their own villages near Seminole towns, paid tribute in crops, and in return gained protection. Over time, lines between cultures softened. Languages blended. Food traditions merged. Marriages created families whose roots stretched across continents. American officials would later call them the Black Seminoles, but no label could fully capture what they had become. A people forged together by resistance. Then came war. On December 28, 1835, the Second Seminole War ignited after years of pressure from the United States to remove the Seminoles from Florida. But this war wasn't only about land. Slaveholders feared the Seminole territory had become a sanctuary, a place proving that black freedom could exist just beyond plantation borders. For 7 brutal years, black and native fighters resisted one of the most expensive wars the US government would ever wage against indigenous people. They knew the swamps. They knew the terrain. And they refused to disappear quietly. Still, power has a way of advancing. By May 26, 1838, the forced removal of the Cherokee officially began, a tragedy history remembers as the Trail of Tears. Nearly 16,000 Cherokee were driven west. Historians estimate that about 4,000 died from hunger, disease, and exhaustion. Yet walking those frozen paths were also black tribal members, some enslaved, others free, many bound by family ties deeper than law could define. Imagine the sound of wagon wheels grinding against rock, children crying softly through the night, parents unsure if the sunrise would bring relief or more loss. History recorded the march, but it did not record every face. After the Civil War ended in April 1865, hope flickered again. New treaties were signed in 1866, promising citizenship within tribes to formerly enslaved people, known as the freedmen. For a moment, it seemed belonging had finally been secured. But history turned once more. On March 4, 1893, the US government established the Dawes Commission to create official tribal rolls, lists that would determine who legally counted as native. What sounded administrative would change lives forever. Many freedmen were placed on separate rolls, even when their bloodlines and family histories were intertwined with the tribes. Others were excluded entirely. Overnight, identity became paperwork. Imagine knowing your grandmother spoke the tribal language, knowing your family survived removal together, only to open a government record and see your existence reduced to a category that quietly pushed you outside the circle. You do not belong. At least, not on paper. Yet truth is stubborn. Descendants of black Native Americans have spent generations fighting for recognition, filing lawsuits, preserving oral histories, and refusing to let their ancestors fade into silence. Because memory cannot be legislated away. And heritage does not disappear simply because a registry says so. The past is far more connected than we were often taught. Cultures did not live in isolation. They met. They blended. They protected one another. They became family. So when we picture early America, we should not see separate stories running side by side. We should see them braided together. And maybe the most haunting realization is this: erasure does not mean these people were never there. It only means their story was not carried forward. But stories have a way of resurfacing, like footprints revealed when the tide pulls back. And the story of Black Native Americans reminds us of something powerful. Identity is not always found in textbooks. Sometimes it lives in remembered songs, in inherited strength, in the quiet refusal of descendants who say, "We are still here." Because no matter how many records tried to redraw the lines, some histories were never meant to disappear.
Don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscription button